Hey Dev, how are you?
Things look a little bit difficult for France suddenly, don't they? It's strange with the team that they have. But it was a great game. And gotta give credit to Coman, I guess, for the lack of old Nemesis, old friend of ours. Anyway, before we go into the depth of it, what's your overall, what did you take of it? What's your takeaway?
um, I didn't particularly like this game. France, for all their talent and all the individual superiority they have all across the pitch and against every opponent so far, they're not as impressive as they should be, right? And their games are not as tactically interesting as they should be because you have all these players and you have all that quality and you have all these options. You have the depth, you have the quality up front, in the back, in the middle. But I'm not seeing that, right? I'm not seeing this overwhelming favorite that's meant to steamroll every single team in the tournament and then not even break a sweat because that's what we were promised, right? That's what we were promised. But both Deschamps and Koeman, to an extent, they're two coaches that don't necessarily get the best out of their teams, right? Even if they do have talent at their disposal, I still feel like they don't optimize them that well. And I guess that's where these elite coaches do come into play, right? And we keep talking about it. That you don't have to be that type of a coach at the international stage, but you still have to have some semblance of sanity and just stability in your team. For example, France today, they obviously didn't have Mbappe, so they had to improvise, right? They had to adapt to not having their star player in the team. But even without Mbappe, you shouldn't suffer um, in the attacking phase of play, right? Because France do have enough to cover for the absence of Mbappe, but they couldn't because they were so unbalanced. They didn't have a left flank at all. It was all up to the fullback to hold the width, to provide the depth, and as a result, there was just nothing, right? There was nothing. It was this big void on the left side, and I feel like that was a big thing. And for Deschamps to have this sort of team, this sort of depth, and not be able to utilize properly, that's a coaching failure to me. That's something that should not be happening when you actually have the means to fix whatever void there is in the team, and there has been a void, and to me that's kind of the main flaw of France. So at this moment, at least, so that's why the game was kind of it was the first nil-nil draw in the tournament, and I wasn't expecting it, to be honest, because these two teams have the firepower. They do have enough to give us more than they have to give us. But I'm not sure. What do you think, Dev? What do you think of the game?
Yeah, I mean, but I didn't think it was set up for a draw. I didn't think any of the teams wanted a draw. Like there are games that you set up for a draw. I didn't think that was the intention, but the finishing just wasn't there. I think Griezmann missed. Uh, I would say a couple of chances that would have probably should have probably gone in. And Netherlands spent a lot of time like defending. If you look at the stats, about 80% of the time, right? They were just defending, and it was good. And I think overall, I think France tried, but I wasn't okay with that original setup that they started with a 4-4-1-1, and I didn't. That's okay with the Dembele with Mbappe out. Sure,
Mhm.
they had to make some like they had to make adjustments. I get that, but they have so many good players in their ranks.
Mhm.
So I think even tactically, I think yeah, there wasn't didn't feel that. That's and it's interesting now because if you look at the way Austria is playing, which
Mhm.
played pretty well in the last two games, and the state of that group. So France have 4 points, Netherlands have 4 points, Austria have 3 points. It'll be interesting to see like what happens and who
Mhm.
is that second team that goes through. It can be that France and Austria go through and Netherlands doesn't, or Netherlands and France goes through and Austria doesn't, and Netherlands and
Mhm.
Austria go through and France doesn't. So it's going to be
Exactly.
interesting what that group looks like after the next set of games. So yeah, but to your point, like um, everybody expected a lot more from France in this
Mhm.
tournament, and I don't think we have seen that yet, and
Mhm.
that's a bit concerning. I won't say concerning. I won't say concerning, but it is. It is what it is. Can they turn it around and go from there?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing with France. One positive I would take away from this is that they can actually grow into games, right? So they will start off slow and they are kind of not really into it, not really showing what they can actually do. But then when they actually need to do more, when they're pressed against the wall in a sense, they will start growing into the game. I think mentally they are aware that okay, we are the better side, we are here to win, we are here to dominate you. But then at the same time, even if they grow into the game, even if they actually get that hold of the opponent, I still didn't see enough from them to actually be the clear winner here because you could say okay they had their chances, but I wouldn't say that a draw was necessarily um, unfair towards them because the Netherlands also showed something there and scored a goal, which was then ultimately um,
So,
called off for VAR.
mhm.
VAR, sorry. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that France, even though mentally they might be there, they might be aware of their own quality and their own status as a favorite, but at the same time, they're not applying that enough on the pitch. I guess what was bound to happen was them being far more central with this type of structure that they have. Right, it was more of a 4-2-2 without actual width and depth on the left side, as you mentioned, and then you have Dembele on the right side, and we know that Dembele for France is a bit different, whereas he's not exactly a touchline winger, right? He won't be wide and high and provide that width. Instead, he will drop deeper and then he will be wide and then he will kind of invert into the middle and have this free roll between the lines. But France had more of the same thing on the left side as well because they didn't have a winger, they didn't have a Barcola, they didn't have anyone to actually attack the space on that side, be an outlet because Mbappe was out, right? So in that case, what happens is you have this France that's very, very central that has a wide back four, but then they have like three sets of twos just down the middle, and it's easy or easier for the Netherlands to kind of just compact the middle of the pitch and then not worry about the flanks as much because they know that the main firepower that used to be there is not there anymore, right? So it was their job was slightly easier than it would have been in normal circumstances, and due to Deschamps' player profiling or just choosing the squad for this clash. So I feel like that was one of the things. And then you have Griezmann, who's down the middle, and I feel like Griezmann is a big cog in that machine, and he is. And he will have this free roll across the final third, and he will drop deep, and he will connect the thirds, and he will do all of that. But all of it will happen down the middle, and if France cannot really capitalize on that properly, then it gets very, very difficult for them. And you have Thuram up front, who is a brilliant player. I love Thuram. He's a very, very good number 9, but he can be a bit hit and miss in front of goal. That's one of the flaws that he has, is that sometimes he'll be a brilliant finisher, but sometimes he'll just miss the chances that he's not supposed to miss, right? And Griezmann himself, you mentioned it, Dev. He was a bit off today. I think he was a bit tired. He was a bit exhausted. Maybe he's been running too much, or maybe just playing too much, and he looked a bit off in front of goal. He had like 2 or 3, you know, huge chances, and you cannot afford to miss those chances. And as good as he is, that should have been better from him. So, we often say Griezmann is one of the most underrated players on the planet, and he is. But we also have to say, okay, now was the time to maybe take Griezmann off and try something different because give him a rest. He's been doing a lot. He's been great. He's been good, but they needed something different. I feel like so maybe this management of the squad wasn't the best either. So there's a lot of flaws here that kind of crept under the surface of this seemingly perfect team, right? And those flaws could cost them once they actually meet teams that can hurt them, right? The teams that can actually match them in some instances, because the Netherlands have a talented squad, but it's nowhere near this France squad individually, right? So player for player, it's just a huge difference. So I felt like they are still the ones that should be happier with this draw, but at the same time they could have done more, which is alarming for France.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with a lot of the stuff that you said there. Griezmann did have an off night compared to his standards. But I'll come back to a couple of other players. And again, I'll come back to the Barcelons because it just happens with me. So Dumfries as a right back. And then we had Javi Simmons
Mm-hmm.
and we had Frimpong, correct?
Hmm.
And both are players that we are like we are being people are connecting them to us. Whether we get them or not, that's separate. That's beside the point. But I'm not going there. But if you take into consideration those two players
Yeah.
and the fact that they constituted maybe 90% of Netherlands' so-called attack, Netherlands had an XG of about 0.33 with this France team,
Mhm.
which I would take as a proxy for, let's say, Real Madrid, because so many French players actually play for Madrid. Just,
Mhm.
indulge me here, right? Um, is that the front line that we are looking for? Because I didn't see them like to be extremely effective in
Mhm.
this game. Again, national team, club football,
Mhm.
very different. I
Yeah.
get it,
Yeah.
but I didn't really feel that connection between, let's say, a Javi Simmons and a Frimpong, or
Mhm.
Dumfries coming on the flank and actually feeding. Yes, De Jong was not there, so it was mostly Reginder who was in midfield. But yeah, I wanted
Mhm.
to understand. What do you make of that?
Well, on Xavi Simons, real quick, I thought he had a good game, a really good game. He's tactically the solution for almost everything for the Netherlands, in possession and out of possession as well. He's the kind of dot that connects everything, right? But Netherlands try to play through the pie a lot, maybe even too much for my liking, because all their movements were kind of centered around making the middle of the pitch less compact and less marked, and then they would look for those passes from the back line straight into the pie, who would use his strength and back to goal play to kind of get the ball and then laid off into Simmons and into who was it? It was Frimpong. Yeah, you mentioned Frimpong on the right side of the pitch. So those were the two runners, or just players who would attack the space behind the opposition's line, and the pie was there to kind of drag them out, get the ball, and then laid off into them. Now the back line and just ahead of the back line, so the double pivot ahead of the back line, their task was kind of to drag the markers away and free those corridors that would allow you to access the pie down the middle. Right? That was the whole plan. Now Xavi Simmons did what he does really well is he receives the ball in those pockets when he has space and time, and he can carry the ball forward, and then he connect with the players up front. Now I saw him do it a couple of times, and he was quite effective when he had the chance, and he was at the end of that goal that got cancelled in the end as well. So he has that in him to be inside the box, actually use his ball striking, use that instinct for scoring goals. Like he has the instinct, so he's a more of an instinctive finisher, which Barca lack. And I feel like Barca could get something different with him in there. And as I said, tactically and structurally, he is a solution for a lot of things because he enables whatever Netherlands wants to do, he will enable it, right? He's that sort of a versatile profile. And we'll talk about him more on our channel, so I'll leave something for that time. On Frimpong, I feel like that those reports, I don't know what to make of them because he's not exactly the type of player that we need. Now, okay, we have Hansi Flick coming in, and Hansi Flick likes wing backs. He likes to have his fullbacks in a more of an attacking role, right? Okay, so that's fair enough. He likes one of them to be a deeper hybrid, like a center back slash a fullback, but the other one is usually the higher position one, the more attacking one. So maybe Frimpong is that because he's more of a wing back than a fullback, right? But he's also not a winger because there's a difference between that. What he likes to do is he likes to start a bit deeper and then he likes to arrive into the space. So he goes into the space that he likes to occupy. He doesn't start there. He doesn't start out wide or high. He has to get there, and he has to have that acceleration and that space to run into to be the most effective that he can be, right? And he didn't have that. He had Dumfries behind him, which meant that he was the one who would occupy the higher zones at all times, and he would start in those higher zones. And I feel like that kind of limited him a little bit, right? So that was a thing that I didn't like in the setup particularly. But also, he's a very Bundesliga type of player, right? He needs the space. He needs to have that freedom. And if you kind of translate that position, that profile of player to La Liga, especially Barcelona, and when he's facing those deep blocks and players marking him tightly, two, three players maybe potentially, I don't know how he handles that, right? Maybe he does because I can't really say for sure because I've not scouted him properly just yet. This is just my initial observations, let's just put it that way, and very very rough estimates of the player. So it might change. I have to look more into him if the links are, if they grow any stronger. But at the moment I don't really feel that he's the solution to anything in particular that we need. um But yeah, that's kind of where I am with Frimpong. Xavi, on the other hand, I do like Simmons. I think Simmons would be a good addition, but he would come in as a low knee. So that's kind of, do we even do that? Because you're basically developing a player for PSG, and there's no way that they're going to sell to Barca, at least not for a price that Barca can afford. So I don't know how suitable or viable that deal will be for Barcelona. Not at this
Coming
moment,
back
at
to
least.
another player, but
Yeah.
on the opposite side. And again, this player also has been linked with us on every transfer window for the last 7 years. Rabiot. I thought Rabiot
Mhm.
had a good game today.
Mm,
I really think Rabiot played really well compared to in that midfield, Chamonix, and and was pretty effective in actually orchestrating most of the attacks that
mhm.
France did. Does this Rabiot have a place in, let's say, in a hypothetical situation, because he's been connected with us so many times, and it's not that expensive probably?
Mhm.
Um, does he add anything to Flick's Barcelona that we are
I
missing
don't
at this moment?
I don't know because so what about Barca missing in that midfield? They're missing legs. Flick will want legs. He will want someone more physical, more stronger, someone with athleticism, with stamina, with power. Don't think Rabiot necessarily fills that void that Flick would want to be filled here. So we need someone who's potentially even less technical. Let's just put it that way. It doesn't have to be less technical, right? But the focus is on the other side of the spectrum, right? We have the technical players and we need someone to complement them in a more defensive kind of role, right? I think that's what Flick would want, at least according to all the teams that we have seen play so far. He doesn't have a huge CV, right? We've seen him with Germany, we've seen him with Bayern, that's it, right? But in both those cases, he preferred a certain type of midfielder to accompany his main pivot, right? So his main distributor, a technical player, there was always someone next to him as a bodyguard, right? Someone who can eat the ground, who can cover a lot in front of the defense, so to be more of a runner than the passer, right? Off the ball, I mean, more of a runner off the ball than necessarily be the one to carry the burden of the whole progression phase, right? So that's someone that Barca have been looking for a while, because even with Xavi, it was the same thing where we missed that kind of a profile because we were always too open, we were always too kind of not compact enough, right? So we needed those players to kind of fix the flaws of the structure. But in reality, what happens is that you cannot do that, right? You cannot really put players, plug players in to fix your structural problems, right? That's why players like Romeo, for example, have suffered a lot because the structure around them has not been good enough, right? If you put players like that out into the open and you expose their flaws, that's what happens, right? You crash and burn, basically. So I feel like Rabiot, for all his qualities, and he does have a lot of qualities, right? But he's been more of a figure up front, someone who pushes forward and creates and even tries to score. He was more, at least in this game, right? He was far more attacking minded than what Barca would be looking at the moment. So I don't think that he would be the solution at the moment. No.
All right, I'll come back to another topic of like favorite topic of mine that's going on every game. What about those long balls? France 59% and Netherlands 55%, and then connected with the all the crossing that happened, and France had about 24% of crosses, while the Netherlands had about 38%. So we got a lot of vertical balls and we got a lot of crossing happening. And yes, it's cup football, and I understand that. But is this like the most is this what is modern football? Is this what we are evolving to from now that so-called tiki taka is dead, and all of that stuff that people keep talking
Mhm.
about? Is this the spectacle? And does that make football much more interesting or viable? Or what is the reason why every single game in this tournament had so much percentage of long balls?
See, I'm not sure. To each his own. I always say that. So there's no right or wrong way to play, right? We keep saying that, and that's so true. Now, is this the most optimal way to play? Now you have to look at the profiles in the squad. So what do France have, for example? They do have Thuram up front. Okay, you have a player who can be a type of a target man, right? You can actually go for it, but you don't have runners really. You don't have Mbappe. Dembele can be a runner, but he's more of a ball to feed kind of player. So you don't want to feed him the balls into space either. You don't have a Barcola. He's on the bench. You don't really have. Well, you do have Rabiot who can make those forward runs, but he doesn't really do that as often. You have Griezmann, who will be more of a ball to feet kind of player, who will drop deep and who will connect the thirds, but he won't attack the space, right? So does it make sense for France to go long? I don't think it particularly does. Now, the Netherlands have been very passive off the ball for most of the stages of the game in a kind of 4-4-2 type of formation, and they were happy to drop deep. Now, were France unable to breach through them with some sort of intricate passing down the middle because they don't have width and depth, right? Remember, so they have to go down the middle. If they don't feel confident in kind of outplaying Netherlands in these tight spaces, then of course, yeah, the only other way to do it is to go over them, right? So that was the only viable way to go through. And the same with Netherlands on the other hand, because France, again, they were also sitting very, very deep. And I think that if we're mentioning trends in this Euros, I think is deep blocks as well. There's only maybe a handful of teams who have actually employed a high press, that being Spain and Germany, for example, or maybe there was more. Austria was very, very aggressive as well, for example. But I think in general, deep blocks like a 5-4-1 or 4-4-2 blocks, they have been very, very prominent in this Euros. Teams like to sit back and they like to invite you into their own half and then try and beat you on the counter, right? So that's, and then if you're a team who defends deep and wants to break fast, of course you're going to try it with the long balls. So that's why the long balls have been more prominent as well. But it comes back to the whole tactic with Memphis Depay, who starts up high, and you have to break the lines and get to him as quickly as possible, and that you do that with long balls as well. So I think there have been a couple of moves that Netherlands have tried, like more positional, so to speak, or something that kind of they move pieces around to create those corridors for the pie to kind of exploit. I think it was a Schouten. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but he would drag Chouameni more to the side, and that will open the corridor for De Vrij to kind of access the pie down the middle. And as soon as that happens, you have Simmons, you have Frimpong kind of bursting into the back line or into the space behind the back line. And Netherlands do have those players. They have Gakpo as well, who can attack space. So they have more profiles that actually suit that style of play. So I would say that when it comes to the long balls, probably their approach made more sense on paper than France's. Now, didn't give them anything. Well, they gave them 1 point, and they'll probably be happy with that. But theoretically, they created a more optimal environment for them to succeed than France did, despite all the individual superiority that's on France's side.
Agreed, but then if you look into all of that, like I think France had like two big chances to Netherlands one,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
It wasn't that you created a lot of chances through this long ball
Mhm.
cross and inshallah, whatever
Yeah,
they're talking
because
about.
you're actually inviting so you're being purposely being the more passive team, right? So that means by default you're going to have fewer chances at the opposition because you are willingly kind of ceding possession. You're giving the other team all the protagonism in the world. And you're saying, okay, you will have multiple chances. We'll only have a few, but then we have to make ours count. But they couldn't really, right? So they couldn't really. So even though on paper it made sense, in reality on the pitch, I don't think it yielded them enough, not enough at least. Maybe I don't know. Maybe a draw is enough for them. I feel like a draw against France, if it sees them through, at the end of the day, they'll look back at it and they say, okay, that was worth it. Our
I'll
plan,
probably
right?
possibly agree with you that maybe
Yeah.
for Netherlands, coming in for a draw does make
Mhm.
sense because if you look at it, like Netherlands didn't even have one through ball, like one through ball in the whole game. Right. Which, and
Yeah.
you have Xavi Simmons who can play as a 10, who does, in Leipzig, he does exactly the same thing. They release him as a
Mhm.
runner, and he's
Mhm.
a handful to deal with, right? So it's not that he can't play the role. But here, I mean, if you look into how Koeman set it up, I think it was like, yeah, I mean, there's hardly any impetus, right? There was this, okay, there's a long ball and then you cross and then something happens. With Gakpo, something happens. But apart from that, um, in the midfield, there was hardly any. I think like there was hardly any impetus towards releasing the runner or
Mhm.
slipping that ball through or just creating overloads in the box from run in that aspect. Right, we hardly saw anything.
Yeah, true. The only type of overload they did was in midfield at times because France defended, remember, they defended at 4-4-2. And what Netherlands would do, they would have a line of four in the back, and they would have three midfielders, and their fullbacks were kind of positioned in medium height. Let's put it that way. So they're not high initially. They were kind of in the medium height. So they would pin the wide midfielders, or they would actually drag the wide midfielders to the sides, and that would create a 3 versus 2 in the middle of the pitch for Netherlands. Right. So they had three midfielders against France's two, and they could progress the play that way to the middle. So that was one way. So you get one of Xavi, Simmons, or I don't know, someone who drops deeper. You get them free on the ball and they can carry the ball forward. That was one of the ideas that they had. Now, as you said, they've not really utilized it as much. France gave them time and space on the ball, and when they did, usually what will happen, they will either look for depth immediately or go wide real quickly, and then, as you said, try and put those crosses in and see if they can do something like that. But generally, yes, we didn't see enough from them. But again, it could have been just that they were okay with that. They were okay with just playing it a bit safer on the safer side, and then not conceding a goal. And if that was the plan, I guess it worked.
Yeah, I guess it worked. But now, if you look at the second set of games, like I think France is against Poland. I think France is going to
Mm,
win,
yeah.
given the way Poland's been playing. But Austria Netherlands is not going to be like an easy match for either team. Given the way
Mm,
Austria's been playing, they've been playing really good in this
mm.
tournament. So, is that a risk for Netherlands per se in being able to qualify?
Mm. Potentially, yes, because if we look back at the Austria game that we covered last time, Austria were amazing, right? They were, and we know what kind of football they will deploy. They will be very aggressive. They will be on the same page. They will transition from defense to attack seamlessly, and they will do it very quickly, and intensely, right? So that's what they do. Now, can Netherlands actually handle that kind of pressure, intensity? That will be the main talking point of that game. I feel like because they do have outlets, right? So if Austria press them and they go over the Austrian press into the runners, that could be a solution that could work well because France didn't really press. They would just drop deep and they were soaking up pressure, right? And since Netherlands couldn't really sustain that pressure efficiently, they didn't concede a lot of chances, right? So that was kind of the thing. Now, if Austria commit players forward and they go forward very aggressively, and the Netherlands play over them into, I don't know, Depay and then Gakpo and Frimpong and whoever they have, and if they give Xavi Simmons the time and space to carry the ball, they can hurt Austria in transition, right? That can happen, absolutely can. But it will be a much more open game than this one, I would say. So uh, it's a tough one to call. It's a tough one to call. I would still kind of lean towards Netherlands because the individual talent is kind of greater, but Koeman is not really filling me with confidence, whereas Ragnick is someone who's very clear with his approach. He's someone who will jolt down his players, who will actually set them up optimally according to the profiles that he has. Now, is Koeman going to do that? I don't know. Koeman is more in the camp with Deschamps and even Southgate because they do have quality over some of the other teams, but they don't really have the tactical platform to optimize that quality. So um, I don't know. Mostly, well, often in these cups, it comes down to that mentality and that individual quality. So in that regard, the Netherlands would have an advantage on paper, right? But this we've seen in this Euros that it's not always the case, right? The so-called the smaller countries have been fighting back. So I would love nothing more than to see another
Me
upset.
too. I would love it. One upset, and especially with Austria because they've been playing so well as a team. Like
Mhm.
they've got nobody whom you actually know, like no famous names and so on. So like, but you see a Marcel Sabitzer playing in like Austria. He's like playing like a reincarnated player. I've never seen him play this well in any team that he plays for. But that's what happens when you have it's coach and then player profiling and how you set up the team and they really play as a team. If you look
They
into
do.
the way they press, they fall back. Austria's really played every single
Mhm.
game. And we even played like I think they won the game three goals. I think they did today, if I'm not mistaken, the earlier game.
Oh
But yeah,
yeah.
that's it's not going to be easy for Koeman to win against Austria that easily because they have it in them to if they win that game they're through the round, so they're not going to give it up so easily. It's going to be hard. But on the other side, I think France with Poland hasn't been the best to be entirely so I
Mhm.
don't think there's any problem there. So I think um, you know it will be between Netherlands and Austria to figure out who's the next one who's going in.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean that was it. Was yeah, to your point, and thank you for everybody who's joined. Mostly that's how we felt about the game. It was like, yeah, it could have been better. Probably it was a little bit boring, maybe, and we probably could have seen a little bit more. But I think with Mbappe out and Coman considering France to be a tough opponent, which they are, I think both played it a little bit safe, and that's what we saw on the field out there. So that was it, to be entirely honest. And the next game for between Austria and Netherlands is going to be interesting. And I don't know whom to call for. I think both teams have equal chances. I think Austria actually has a chance of qualifying based on the way that they're playing and based on how we saw this Netherlands playing, right? But football's football, so anything can happen. One never knows. So that was that. Dom, any final thoughts before we sign off?
I would just like to thank everyone for joining us. Yesterday we had like about 500 people here watching us talk about football, and it feels good to see that. And if you do have any questions, you do have any comments, everything is welcome. We would like some feedback, like your thoughts and questions on the game and whatever you want to actually. But yeah, we appreciate you stopping by and supporting our work. We will try and put out more. As always, do check out our channel. We have a YouTube channel, we have a Twitter account, we do have a blog and a podcast as well. So we are all over the place and you can find us everywhere. So make sure to check us out. It's Barca Football across the board. So we'll see you there.
Yeah, and we will try and do this in the league as well for some of the games. I think we've enjoyed doing it. We'll obviously have to bring some, data and stats and all of that. We'll figure it out. And yes, the cameras are a little bit blurry, and we'll have to do all of that stuff. So yes, you're right. All of you are right. We're working on it, learning through the process. None of us are actually by profession, any of it. So, but it's been fun, and we know where we know there's a lot of areas to improve, and so we'll work on that. Well. So that's that, and we'll be back again tomorrow to cover over the weekend whichever games are there. And till then, stay safe, share, talk about us, and Visca El Barca. Even though we are not talking about Barca, but that's how we sign off. So see you again tomorrow, and thank you
See
for
ya.
joining.